Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to open the panel on greening agriculture in the EU and globally, organized by the World Bank. I am Sergiy Zorya. I am lead agricultural economist with the World Bank for Europe and Central Asia region, and I will moderate the session. Our session is the continuation of the first panel we listened today. Climate change and greening agriculture is a very important topic. Agriculture is the victim of the climate change. We see increased frequencies of the extreme weather events in Greece and all over the world. But we don't need to forget that agriculture also contributes to climate change. Depending on the country, depending on the region, contribution can be between 20 to 25%. So when we talk about greening agriculture, we talk about both climate adaptation and climate mitigation. EU is indeed innovator and pioneer in many aspects of climate smart agriculture and greening agriculture. And the first session, before our panel, talked a lot about EU, and we will continue discussing the common agricultural policy, opportunities and challenges for implementation. The World Bank, we will be working with selected EU member states to help with implementation. It's very important task for us too, but we will be also monitoring and watching it to learn, to gain experiences for other countries where we work around the world. We see that increasingly there is the need for reform is increasingly recognized globally, not only in the EU. And what we learn from our experiences is that implementation could be challenging. We completed the global study in 2022 on repurposing agricultural expenditures for creating more sustainable food systems. And we found that, and we showed that just eliminating all types of the farm support is not going to be only politically infeasible, but also is not necessarily reduce greenhouse gas emissions, will definitely increase the cost for farmers and the cost of the healthy diet. So instead, we need to think of repurposing, improving public expenditures and policies to help farmers to adopt more climate-smart agricultural technologies. We in the bank, we started to increasingly help countries to do that, also in the EU, through climate change and development reports to help countries to repurpose their policies and expenditures with the Paris Agreement. So today's panel brings the top-notch experts on the topic of the green agriculture in the EU and globally. And I would like to present the esteemed panelists. We have Dimitris Psaltopoulos, a professor of Department of Economics, Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. We have Dimitris Voloudakis, capacity building director in Greece, New Agriculture, New Generation program. And we have Marc Sadler, my colleague from the World Bank, program leader in sustainable development practice for EU member states. We should start the discussion on the new ambition of the green growth in the EU and globally. And the first question goes to you, Dimitris. As we learned from the previous session, the EU and Commission has recently approved the new CAP strategic plans, 2023-2027. These plans are expected to provide a lot of impetus on environmental measures, on the climate resilience and mitigation. Tell us about this new CAP direction, how it's different from the previous attempts under the Common Agricultural Policy to address this challenging issue.
Thank you, Sergey. Kalimera σας. First of all, I very much agree with what you said, but it's a bit, let's say, the timing of these days is that we need to refer to planning as implementation, which is the tough cookie to crack, is something for the very near future. I'll try to be as let's say, as brief and simple as possible. In general, the environmental and climate ambitions of the new Common Agricultural Policy are specific to two aspects. First, a higher level of ambition, and second, a new delivery model. Perhaps even the second is more important than the first. With regards to the first point, the ambitions are much higher than in the previous programming periods. For example, very indicatively, there is a no backsliding clause that is very well known, so that take, for example, a member state such as Austria that is used to be committing something like 70–80% of the CAP budget on environmental and green policies. Now, they would have to go better, even more. They cannot go less than that because they already committing a lot. Second, and this is a bit of a sensitive issue, and it was a very tricky issue, I can tell you, that seems to be a good alignment between the CAP strategic plans and the Green Deal ambitions and the Green Deal targets. Now, why was that a tricky issue? Simply because, first, we had the publication of the Commission proposals on the new Common Agricultural Policy, and this was followed by the proposal on the Green Deal. A lot of people argued that it would have been vice versa, so it was a very tough path towards to this kind of alignment. Third, there is an enhanced conditionality and stronger eligibility conditions. Simply, beneficiaries of direct payments, and not only direct payments, have now to follow a stronger set of mandatory requirements, and a lot of the requirements that were actually part of the greening component of Pillar 1 support in the last period are now mandatory. So this is more difficult for our farmers. Fourth, and that's something that we're going to revisit in the future regarding implementation, is the tough, cookie of eco schemes. Nowadays, at least 25% of the CAP strategic plans budget, of the direct payments budget, has to be allocated to eco schemes, which provide, according to the majority of people that are working in this field, stronger incentives for climate and environmentally friendly farming practices. Also, rural development has a minimum amount of resources, percentage of resources that have to be dedicated on climate and environmental issues. 40% of the budget, of the CAP budget, has to be climate relevant. And also the farm advisory services, I think there is a common understanding that they are an extremely important tool in order to be able to approach reliably the new CAP ambitions. Now, the new delivery model, and I'll be very brief on it, it is a model that it is based on evidence. Now, direct payments are part of the whole picture nowadays. It's not only Pillar 2, the rural development, which was supposed to be strategically developed. Now, it's also direct payments, and that's, for economists as us, is very important because these two pillars are very interacting one with the other. The EU has set the common framework, but the member states are those who design their programs by using what we call SWOT analysis, identifying needs, and then using the tools that are provided as interventions by the Commission, and binding different interventions into each one of the 9 specific objectives of the Common Agricultural Policy. And of course, in addition to the evidence-based approach, which is sometimes not a very easy thing for the member states for reasons that we can all understand possibly, there are strict monitoring arrangements on behalf of the European Commission. If, for example, a member state seems not able to achieve the targets of certain indicators, maybe this would lead to reduction of financial resources. So it's a new environment which is, to sum up, much better in terms of concepts and designs, but we'll still have to see the operational side of things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitris. The previous session emphasized that human capital and skills are extremely important for implementation and helping farmers to adopt climate-smart agriculture. Dimitris, you work on, you lead the New Agriculture, New Generation program working with farmers and young farmers. Share with us your experiences on human capital and agricultural farmer skill issues in Greece from your perspective.
First of all, Sergiy, I would like to thank you and thank the World Bank for the invitation in this very interesting panel. I work in the New Agriculture, New Generation organization since 2019, and more or less I hear the same problems for the last 4 years, and I'm sure that if we asked a farmer 20 years ago what are the main problems of the agricultural sector, we would get the same answer. High cost, low prices. High cost, low prices. And in addition to that, we have to consider that we have more challenges now, for example, greening agriculture, climate change, digitalization, etc., etc. I would like to start with a reference that according to a recent European Parliament's study, April 2022, the CAP has a very limited and indirect effect on structures, especially when we are talking about small and medium agricultural holdings. I try to consider, to imagine a Greek farmer here in Delphi with a very small holding, talking about the eco schemes and all the processes of the second pillar, which would he would listen to that like something, you know, very weird and extraordinary. So we have to think all about this environment. And a previous speaker said something that it is very, very important. The low level of education of the agricultural population in Greece. Less than 7% of the Greek farmers have acquired specific, typical agricultural training. Less than 7%. Imagine that. Also, around 8% of the agricultural population is considered as young farmers. More than, I think, 30% of the agricultural population in Greece is over 65 years old. So this is the general environment. Now, it may sound very weird, but around 40%, according to the official data of the Greek Ministry of Agriculture, around 40% of Greek farmers are women. As a New Agriculture, New Generation, we considered all that issues. We are trying to enhance skilling, reskilling and upskilling. We are trying to provide career opportunities, entrepreneurship opportunities for the Greek farmers. New Agriculture, New Generation was established in 2018 from a funding donor of Stavros Niarchos Foundation. Until now, we have more than 30,000 direct and indirect beneficiaries all around the country in more than 65 locations. We are trying to implement innovative training programs. We are not trying to compete universities or the National Research Organization, Dimitra. For example, we are running right now a unique program, not only in Greece, but in Europe, about queen rearing, breeding in the apicultural sector. Also, we are running a unique business program for agri-food exports. It's running right now. We are going to launch the first agricultural leadership program in the next few months. We have some, let's say, experience on that, which experience is based on collaboration. We're trying to build bridges between the Greek players of the Greek ecosystem. And this is something that we will discuss later, but it's very common in the Greek universities. Dimitris, I'm sure that we recognize that, you know, we have laboratories that are in the next doors, and they do not communicate each other. They don't know what the work they do. So we're trying to bring bridges between the ecosystem, between the academia and the enterprises, the agricultural cooperatives, and another innovative approach is that we do not work with the linear teaching method, teacher-student, teacher-student. We are trying to implement more interactive, let's say, approaches, so everyone is learning from everyone. A farmer is also a teacher. His experience is unique, and it is very important, and we have to put this experience on the table. So, in general, this is what we do as New Agriculture, New Generation, and once again, I would like to thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Dimitris. Marc, prior to joining the bank team in Brussels to work on EU countries, you led the World Bank team on to develop and scale up the climate finance, and a lot of that was for agriculture development. So what's your take on challenges and opportunities on greening agriculture globally, which would be relevant to the EU context?
Thanks again. Like the other panelists, thanks very much for the invite today. We're very lucky to be here, and we're very lucky to be working with our clients throughout the European Union. On the challenge, I think we really need to be very clear where agriculture sits. About 6-7 years ago, we worked with the World Resources Institute on their World Resources Report. And the projections are that by 2050, if agriculture does not become part of the transition, it will actually account for 70% of a 2-degree carbon budget. So agriculture will be the new big oil. 70% of the permissible emissions. And so I think we've got to be very realistic about where we are. But as Sergiy referred to, there's this phenomenal dichotomy at the same time as, you know, essentially creating these emissions and the negative impacts on environmental systems. Agriculture feeds and sustains the planet and the increasing population that we have. And this is a really, really complex and problematic problem. It's probably, and it's a personal opinion, of course, but I think it still remains the greatest transition that we face. There are 500 million smallholder farmers on the planet. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's pretty straightforward to go to the 2,000 coal plants on the planet and to introduce new technologies and to pivot them away. That's 2,000 interactions. We're talking 500 million interactions in agriculture. So it is an incredibly complex challenge that we face. The good news, I always start with the bad news so we can move to the good news. But the good news is that there are clearly solutions. And there are real things that we can do. But a few takeaways from looking at this globally in high-income countries all the way through to low-income countries. I think the first one is focused on the big issues first. There is always this tendency to try and lift every problem from the bottom. We're going to change everything immediately. And the reality is, we talk about farmers, but there are very large commercial farmers and there are very small family operations with maybe just a couple of acres. So approaching the system as one won't work. So let's really focus on the big part of the puzzle, because that's where most of the emissions really lie. And it's actually easier to do that in larger agricultural systems, because a lot of these solutions are based on technology and require finance, and that farming system model is much easier to put the solutions into play. The other thing is pick your sectors, right? We know that livestock is the one that's really producing most of these emissions. But there are great examples, and I just picked up Dimitris' example before about countries that move quickly. Ireland moved dramatically in this space to reduce their emissions. Of course, the challenge was that they'd already moved the bar very low, so when the next ratcheting for reducing emissions came, they were already at a very low area. But they fundamentally changed their livestock sector. And that kind of brings me to the second point, which is, regulations are fine, setting targets are fine, but we really have to support farmers with what are the solutions to get there. It's not like other industries where we say, okay, here's the emissions trading system. If you're not reducing by X amount, then it's going to cost you Y to be able to purchase the offsets. Right? It's much easier technological solutions for farmers who are facing pages of directives and complicated things that they've never come across before. So it's terribly confusing, even at that big business level that we're actually looking at. And we used to use a phrase in the climate smart agriculture in high-income countries through everywhere that we engaged, which is really clear. If you cannot show a farmer how they're going to make money, or save time, then get ready to pay. Because you're going to have to invest. You're going to have to incentivize. Believe me, this is the most difficult business on the planet, right? Your profit line depends upon whether the sun shines or the rain falls. This is the riskiest business on the planet. If you can show farmers how they can make money, or save time, you don't need to do anything else. They will move really quickly. The other piece of this is getting really beyond, and this is exactly the work that you're talking about, in really demonstrating, right? It's fine for people like ourselves to say what we think should happen in farming, and farmers are generally quite a traditional gang, even the young farmers. The key is in actually working with small groups to demonstrate what can happen. There was this dramatic expansion of the use of cover crops in the US, and traditional farmers in the US were totally against cover crops. There was also a problem with the American insurance policy that we worked with Secretary Vilsack and others to actually change. But the key to unraveling that was actually working through Iowa and Idaho and a bunch of other states to actually demonstrate to farmers what the impact was of using cover crops in terms of water retention, increased production, reduced use of fertilizers, and sitting down with them and actually doing the spreadsheets. And it seems weird for a World Banker to do that, but it was really important to be able to show that this could actually work. And then the uptake of cover crops was phenomenal throughout the US, a dramatic impact. So focus on demonstrating what can really be done, and then kind of get out of the way, let the farmers do the rest. The other thing, and a last point on this one, and I see it, there's quite a lot of talk in the newspapers at the moment. I think it's very important on the messaging at the moment, and especially in the EU with the new CAP and other requirements that are being put on agriculture, to get the communications right. Right? It's starting to become a bit of a them and us conversation, and farmers are feeling under pressure. It's about building that dialogue with farmers at all levels about how they are a partner in the solution, how they can deliver global public goods, not focusing on how they may be delivering global public bads. Thanks.
Thank you, Marc. Saving money, saving time. Agricultural knowledge and innovation system in the EU is sort of thought as the instrument or the platform or the system in place to help farmers with the knowledge, adaptation, and the adoption of that knowledge on practice. Dimitris, you work on organization helping to improve the skill of farmers, but the success of the climate smart agriculture scale up in Greece depends on strands on the AKIS system. How do you see AKIS system in Greece and how it could be improved, make fitter for purpose of helping farmers to adopt in more climate smart agriculture technologies?
Thank you very much for this question, Sergiy. First of all, when we are talking about the IKIS, Agricultural Knowledge and Innovation System, in general, we are talking about the extension service in agriculture. And maybe this is not very well known, but you know, back in the 50s and 60s, Greece had the most efficient extension service system in the Southern Europe. We managed, after the World War II and the Civil War, to have in the 1956, I think, the very popular term of food security for wheat in Greece in the decade of the 1950s. Because why? Because we implemented the advisory system through the Marshall Plan all over the rural areas in Greece. And by that, we had, let's say, a very solid advisory services in Greece. Unfortunately, this system was abandoned after 1981 and collapsed. Why? Because the Greek Ministry of Agriculture asked all the agronomists to move from the rural areas into their offices for bureaucracy issues. A lot of papers had to be completed for EU, and unfortunately we lost all this heritage. And now we are trying to cultivate the heritage again to the farmers. And you know, the most crucial thing when I talk to farmers, especially to family businesses, father and son, father and daughter, is the issue of trust. Knowledge transfer, advisory system is based on trust. Why? Because you provide an advice, a suggestion to the farmer in order to improve his production, her production, earn more money for who? For his business, for his family. If the advice is not correct, if the advice is wrong, then he will lose money, and then you will lose the level of trust which is necessary for the knowledge transfer system. We have to clarify what are the demands now for the knowledge transfer system and what will be the demands in the next, let's say, 20 years. And now, what is the general environment now? We have a decrease in the rural population in general. We have a decrease in agricultural holdings, both for animal and crop production, around 25 to 30% from 2009 to 2019 in this last decade. Okay? But on the other hand, what we see a very important increase in the number of farmers cultivating and implementing organic farming, organic crop production, organic animal production. Also, you have all these issues about digitalization, about greening, about the second pillar of the CAP. So, Greece, in the last 2-3 years, made some progress in the implementation of a new IKIS system in the country. Nowadays, we have more, with many problems, of course, and we need further development, but nowadays we have more than 180 operational groups, which is a core of the IKIS system, all around Greece. Personally, I would try to connect all these operational groups in terms of products. I mean, if I have an operational group which is implementing an IKIS strategy for olive trees in Kalamata, in Peloponnese, and another operational group here in Amphissa, in Delphi, for the same case, in olive orchards, climate change adaptation in olive orchards, I would try to bring them together, to exchange their experience. Because also demonstration is a very crucial issue for IKIS. You know, a couple of years ago, I made a deep dive into World Bank's statistics data, and I found what? The number of the agricultural machinery and tractors in Greece, the total number of tractors in Greece, is equal to the number of tractors of Bulgaria, Romania, and I think of Serbia too, half of Balkans. We have the same number of tractors as half of Balkans. And the country is 85 mountain country. We don't have plains, we don't have so many valleys. What does this show? That Greeks and Greek farmers, they prefer to work separately, by themselves, alone. And that's why the issue of agricultural cooperatives is a huge capital for Greek agriculture. And for the future, I will try to involve agricultural cooperatives into the AKIS system, How? Greece, as we said, has a very small agricultural land. More of the 90% of the agricultural holdings are family holdings, and we have a very important diversification, geographical diversification and productive diversification. So let's say that the ideal combination of AKIS would be to, let's say, structure these systems in terms of product and in terms of geographical allocation. If we manage to do that, I would bet that the whole picture for the Greek agriculture would be very, very different in the next, let's say, 10 years. In general, this is my comment.
Thank you, Dimitris. Dimitris, AKIS will have, the improved AKIS will have many new tasks with the new CAP. One of them would be to scale up the agro-environmental measures. And it's not new instrument in the common agricultural policy, but there will be more emphasis placed to that instrument. You worked with the World Bank to help the government of Greece to look on the past experiences on efficiency and effectiveness of implementation of agro-environmental schemes in the past. Please share with us your experiences from that work and what kind of recommendation we can provide to the government to improve implementation going forward. Also, maybe talk a bit about the state of the agricultural risk management in Greece, as you also worked on the topic with us.
Thank you, Sergiy. First, because this was collective work, I have to say that a huge amount of credit to our task team leader, Svetlana Edmits, for this work, and also to Panos Varagis, who led the work on the agricultural risk management. Their professionalism and dedication and very high skills led to this work. Now, regarding the agri-environmental measures, and generally measures that are, let's say, very close to what the new CAP is aiming to proceed. Now, our findings, some of our findings are not very, let's say, very pleasant, but that's not only a Greek phenomenon, it's a phenomenon for many other countries. First, I mean, our microeconometric analysis showed that environmental farming is not costless in terms of productive performance. Okay, here one would argue that, it's a societal demand, so it's worth paying this cost. Again, however, this is not only a static phenomenon, it seems to be also a more dynamic phenomenon in terms of the evolution of total productivity. Again, farms that receive environmental subsidies, they seem to be doing less well than farms that are out of this particular game. Perhaps the most unpleasant finding has to do with the fact that, at least in the period of the analysis, farm characteristics do not seem to be affecting productive performance when environmental subsidies are granted. This shows, perhaps quite clearly, that these environmental subsidies are mostly an income transfer, at least for Greek agriculture and at least for this particular period. And again, unfortunately, I'll have some pleasant things to say also. When you see the evolution of performance and productivity, us economists would always like to see improvements in technical changes when we decompose total factor productivity. Unfortunately, this is not the case. All gains are technical efficiency gains, and not any gains on technical change. Now, on a brighter perspective, or, okay, let me give a little bit of bleak picture again. Now, on the support, direct payments seem to be targeting intensive farms in the country. So this is an issue that has to be revisited if we want to pursue a much more, let's say, sustainable agriculture. And also it seems that technological progress, what we found that it's missing, is something that is very path dependent. So who invests on technology? Those who invested in the past. So those who don't invest in the past, they don't seem to be investing. So we don't see the conditions really to facilitate a convergence in this particular game. Now, of course, there are opportunities. We know, and it has been mentioned both by Dimitris and Marc, and also in the last session, the previous session, that technology matters a lot. However, technology is not, size. It's not a suit for all sizes. Technology has to be differentiated. Otherwise, it could be even detrimental to productive performance. Skills and competencies. When in our microeconometric analysis, when we assessed the effects of full training on farm economic performance, they were clearly positive and the results were very robust. So that's a big issue. A lot of inefficiency is caused by limited managerial competencies and effectiveness of organizational routines and adjustment to business environment. I don't need to say anything else. And finally, something that we have to be very, very clear. And I think this is important for the country and also for other EU member states. The problem of Greek agriculture are not the large farmers. And it's not also the very small farms. Productive performance of these two segments is very high, especially of the large guys. The problem is what we call the missing middle. So it's very important that policy initiatives should facilitate an enabling environment which supports efficiency improvements in the process of scaling up through what the bank has said in the repurposing study. Finally, before the buzzer hits, in agricultural risk management, there are surprises were positive rather than negative. A lot of people, when they learned, from the sector here that the World Bank is doing a study on agricultural risk management in Greece, they were saying this and that. But what we found is that the ELGA system of Greece, which is not an extremely old system, if I remember well, is a system with huge advantages and huge potential. If you look in other member states, you would see that you have coverage of 20% in most cases. In some cases, that's the highest level. In Greece, through this compulsory mutual system of ELGA, you have almost all farmers covered. And this is a big issue, especially for what lies ahead. However, the system currently, and due to climate change, is facing pressure. very indicatively, I won't tire you with numbers, but I will tell you that very indicatively that claims paid in 2019 were 300% higher than those paid in 2011. So the system, in order to be financially viable, needs an injection of around 40, 50 million euros per year. Now, what we recommended to the Greek government to do. One characteristic of the system is the high concentration and the limited, let's say, fairness that it embodies. I mean by this that high concentration. There are 2 or 3 phenomena.
1 minute.
Yes, yes, that would be enough. 2 or 3 phenomena that cause most of the damage. Then you have 5 prefectures that they are getting something like 50% or more of the claims, while everybody is paying that 4%. So we think that it's very important that there is a review of the payments that farmers dedicate to the system. It's not possible that everybody pays the same and some people are getting much more benefits. And also there is a need to be, to link that to the CAP. And very finally, policies on risk management and sustainability must be calibrated and retuned so that they link better. In a way, you have to have investment in climate resilience linked to the compensation system that ELGA has. These two has to be linked.
Thank you very much. Marc, last question goes to you. And on agricultural risk management, we need more of that adopted across EU. You worked on that topic globally. Your views on that, please.
Yeah, very quickly, because that big clock is staring at me. But look, I think agri-risk management, the key is to focus on what are the primary risks. And in especially this part of Europe, in southern Europe, it's very clear that drought is one thing, but water scarcity is going to be the bigger issue, right? So that's not just an agricultural problem. That's a problem that cuts across urban use of water, industrial use of water, and the answer is integrated water management. Right? It's not an agricultural solution to deal with drought. It is a water system problem because how you're going to store it, how you're going to manage it, and then look to the experience of California, where effectively there's the war for water between agriculture and growing society. So you have to get into integrated water management. The second thing is heat. Everyone talks about drought, but what's really going to cause the problem in the next 20 to 30 years for agriculture is heat. Right? We worry and we see sunstroke, heat stroke in populations in Europe and globally. How are you going to actually get farmers out into the fields to be able to work when you're looking at a plus 10-degree heat wave that's going on during a cropping season? So we need to actually be focusing on some things that we're not actually looking at. Picking up on your point, and this is a thing that I often say, insurance won't solve it. Right? Insurance was designed for payouts for things that don't happen very often. Climate change is going to make this happen on a more regular basis. So I think it's important to take a really good example from disaster risk management. And generally speaking, in disaster risk management, think earthquakes as one example. $1 spent in investing in resilience is worth $7 to $10 in recovery. And this is part of the problem we have in agriculture. We tend to be paying out the bill after the problem, not investing in resilience at the beginning. And the last point, maybe it's the last point I'll actually make. We had 9 panelists and we had 1 woman. Right? You mentioned 40% of farmers in Greece are actually women. And it is really interesting to go and look at the studies on risk management and gender. What it clearly shows is that women farmers manage risk much better than male farmers, because male farmers are gamblers. So if you're really going to do something about agriculture and you're really going to make it more resilient, you really need to bring forward the women in agriculture.
Thank you, Marc. What an excellent point to end our panel. Thank you very much.